Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and this is our last episode of 2019. It is New Year's Eve, and yes, I'm doing a podcast because I am old and boring. We actually had possible plans for tonight, my husband and I, but we have now opted to stay home and possibly go to bed early. We may be up at midnight. I mean, wow, I really can't. I'm really sounding old right now. I'm okay with that, but just talking about it, saying, you know, like, we may just go to bed early, or maybe we'll sit on the couch and watch TV or something. I don't know. But I'm a major introvert, so it's okay. The party would have been fun, but it would have been, I don't know, a couple hundred people. And so there's different kinds of fun. There's the fun of hanging out with a couple hundred people and dancing and drinking champagne and kissing your hubby at midnight. Or there's the fun of already being in your jammies and maybe still drinking champagne and kissing your hubby at midnight, or maybe being asleep with your hubby and the dogs. Anyway, it's an interview day. It's Tuesday, so I have a returning guest with me on the podcast today. Debbie Burke was on the podcast a while back to talk about the first book in her series that stars Tawny Lindholm. These books are suspense, a little bit of thriller, a little bit of mystery. Tawny, as I said, is the main character, and one thing that I love about this series is that it's set in Montana. Not only Montana, but western Montana, and very near to my hometown. So, as I probably mentioned last time, I get this silly sort of thrill when I'm reading the books, and you know, at the very beginning, the main character Tawny is driving somewhere, and there's a reference to her being 10 miles outside of Glacier National Park, and I'm like, hey, I know where that is. Honestly, 10 miles outside of Glacier National Park could be any number of places. And I don't know specifically what she was referring to, or if this is, you know, even a real place, or if it's just fictional, but I don't care, because I'm like, I've been 10 miles outside of Glacier National Park many, many times. This is my home. This is my happy place. So it just always makes me super happy to read her books, because, you know, they are fun, they are suspenseful, but they're also set in Montana, and I love that. And I love to talk to Debbie about the books. And she is a transplanted Californian. She grew up in California and now lives in Montana, whereas I grew up in Montana and now live in California. So I am very jealous of our role reversal. At any rate, the second book in this Tawny Lindholm series is called Stalking Midas, and the description is as follows. Charming con artist Cassandra Mazza has cornered her prey, Mo Rosenbaum, an addled millionaire with 9 cats, until investigator Tawny Lindholm disrupts the scam. Tawny suspects elder fraud and won't stop digging until she finds the truth. Cassandra can't allow that. She's killed before, and each time it's easier. Tawny will be next. Okay, first off, I like that it's a crazy cat dude instead of a crazy cat lady. It doesn't have to be a crazy person, but, you know, people with many cats are often referred to as crazy. Hey, if you love cats and you're not allergic to them, more power to you. I am allergic to them, so I cannot have 9 cats or 1 cat. At any rate, I like that it's a crazy cat dude instead of a crazy cat lady. But one thing that I really appreciate about Debbie's books is that her main characters are not in their 20s. Tawny is in her 50s. She is widowed. We learned about her late husband in the first book. And there is a friendship, possibly a burgeoning, no, there is a burgeoning romance in this book. I am not really giving too much away because you can tell as you're reading through it, and also Debbie mentions it in the interview. And you know, he's no spring chicken either, and so you don't often see as many main characters who are middle-aged and older, especially not having romances. So I like that you get that representation because, of course, as much fun as our 20s are and as much fun as it is to, you know, read romances where all the characters are 28 or whatever, it's nice to see other age groups represented in more than just secondary characters. And so I very much appreciate that. And I mean, Mo, the character, is in his 90s, I think. I can't remember exactly his age, but he is, he's a curmudgeon. I know so many Mo's and he is just, he's grumpy, he's curmudgeonly, and yet Tawny manages to kind of work around him and become his friend. So I'm going to stop waxing rhapsodic about Montana and about this book, and I'm going to let Debbie talk about her book so that she can give you her perspective on it rather than me yammering on and on. So let's go ahead and get to the interview with author Debbie Burke about her new novel called Stalking Midas. Hi, Debbie. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me back.
I am really excited to chat with you again. We are going to talk about the second book in the series that we started talking about the first time you were on the show. But before we get to that, if you could, for people who maybe didn't hear the first show or need a refresher, just tell a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I was born in San Diego, and I grew up devouring Nancy Drew, Sherlock Holmes, Ian Fleming, Alfred Hitchcock and Ellery Queen mystery magazine. So I, became a great lover of mystery, suspense, thriller, and that's the writing that I got into. My first rejection was for a script for the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV show in the mid-1960s. You probably don't remember that, but maybe your mother does. But it was, I submitted that to them, handwritten on a 3-ring, lined binder paper, and got a very nice rejection back from them saying they didn't accept anything that didn't come through an agent. So it was pretty good for a teenage kid who didn't know any better. So, yeah. And I graduated from University of California at San Diego with a degree in literature, but my real life career was mostly in home building, property management, and other businesses where the only thing that degree was very useful for was I could write a great business letter. So, however, after selling our businesses, my husband and I moved out of the big city to a small town in Montana, and that's when I started getting back into writing and especially writing fiction, and have been right at it full time ever since.
Wonderful. Well, I know it is something that you love, so it's good to hear that you have gotten to it and that you're enjoying this new phase of your career. So since this is a series, let's start with the first book, which is called Instrument of the Devil. If you could just give a brief overview of that, because that's where we are introduced to Tawny, the main character.
Sure. I'd written a number of mysteries over a couple of decades, and I'm really good at collecting rejection slips. I excel at that. So anyway, Instrument of the Devil was probably my 10th or 11th book, but it was the first one that actually was published. And that was in 2017, and I was, of course, over the moon. And then 6 months later, the publisher shut down, and I became an orphan, which happens to a lot of writers. It's almost a badge of courage, a badge of honor that you've survived and endured. So have written a lot of nonfiction articles, magazine articles, and so I was used to magazines going out of business, as they collapsed in the the 90s and early 2000s. So I'm pretty used to being an orphan, and you learn you just have to keep writing and looking for other avenues and outlets. The Instrument of the Devil introduced my main character, Tawny Lindholm, who's a 50-year-old widow who was born and raised in Kalispell, Montana. And like many small town folks, she's a very trusting person. And she gets swept into a romance with a handsome terrorist. And he sets her up as a scapegoat in his plot to destroy the electrical grid. His target is the Hungry Horse Dam where Tawny works, and his weapon is a rigged smartphone, which is the Instrument of the Devil. And that's the first book.
I'm going to jump in here so we can take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit about why else the book is called The Instrument of the Devil. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, Debbie and I were talking about her first Tawny Lindholm novel, which was about a lot of things: terrorism, cell phones, the Instrument of the Devil. And there is, as I said before the break, another reason that she named this book Instrument of the Devil. So let's go ahead and get back to that interview and find out why.
Okay, and it's also the Instrument of the Devil because it drives Tawny absolutely crazy. She has more issues with her smartphone than...
And that part is entirely autobiographical. I have to confess, my smartphone continues to make my life miserable, and but you know, it's one of those things that the necessary evils that you have to live with in the current world.
Right.
I do find a lot of people, and surprisingly even younger people, who still are struggling with them and still, you know, just makes their life crazy. And so I think a lot of that theme resonates with a lot of readers that, you know, just aren't quite used to technology, and it does things that they don't expect, and it does things they don't want it to do, but, you know, they still have to keep struggling with it. So.
Right. Yes, I know my sister feels very similarly, so it's across generations.
Right,
so
right.
That is where we learned, or we met Tawny, and I think we and she learned that she is a lot stronger and more capable than she might have expected. So what's going on with Tawny in the second book? It is called Stalking Midas.
Okay, at the end of Instrument of the Devil, she meets a very brash, bombastic attorney named Tillman Rosenbaum, who saves her from criminal charges. And in Stalking Midas, Tawny is now working as an investigator for Tillman. And she doesn't much like him, but she feels very indebted to him and very grateful for the job. And the story problem in Stalking Midas is Tillman is estranged from his father, Mo, who's a secretive, eccentric millionaire who has 9 cats. And Tillman suspects his dad is being scammed financially, but the two men refuse to talk to each other. So he sends Tawny to find out what's going on with his dad. And the inspiration for this story is basically elder fraud. I've known a number of older people who've been victimized by con artists, including my own adopted mother. And elder fraud is a crime that's extremely common but very underreported because the victims are ashamed and embarrassed. If you've handed over thousands of dollars to someone you later learn is a thief, you don't want anybody to find out about that. And as a result of this fear of revealing the being victimized, the criminals keep getting away with stealing, and they just move on to their next victim. And in addition, with seniors, they often are suffering from dementia and other medical problems that make them especially vulnerable to scammers. So that kind of was my theme for this book, was the dangers of elder fraud.
Right, and we know right away from the very first pages of the book that this is this particular villain is going to go beyond even just fraud. So we know that there are lots of dangers in store for Tawny as she gets involved in this investigation. How do you feel that Tawny has changed as a character since the first book?
She was very naive in Instrument of the Devil, and she almost gets killed because she trusted the wrong guy. But she has now gotten a little more wary, a little more savvy. And in Stalking Midas, though, she is dyslexic and doesn't have much education, so she always feels very over her head. And in this new job, she's got to deal with her boss, Tillman, who is a very successful, high-powered attorney, and he's very demanding. And even though Tawny is smart and intuitive, she still lacks confidence, and she's struggling constantly to do a good job. And her assignment is Tillman's dad, Mo, is to find out about what's going on with him. And Mo is a secretive, abrasive 75-year-old who stubbornly resists Tawny's attempts to help him, but she refuses to give up on him. And while they're out cross-country skiing, she is very courageous and rescues him from a stalking mountain lion that is after him. And that's kind of the turning point in their relationship. Because she saved his life, Mo begins to trust her, and they form an uneasy friendship.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of funny because, you know, at the beginning of the book, you really find out that that Mo and his son Tillman do not really have a relationship. They haven't spoken, and yet he sends Tawny to go deal with this man that he refuses to deal with.
Right.
And she does, because through a combination of, you know, kind of guilt and because she's a good person.
Right. She rises to the occasion, no matter how crummy the occasion may be. You know? So,
yes. And so your inspiration for this story was the elder fraud. Is that correct? Was that your jumping off point for the story, or did you have something else?
Yeah, actually, the germ of the idea came from I was doing a lot of research into elder fraud for magazine articles I was writing, and I went to a lot of seminars and put on by the AARP and law enforcement, and that's where I learned that scammers target people in the places that they are the most vulnerable. They gain the trust of the victim by using something that the victim loves. And in this case, Mo doesn't like people very much, but he's got a real soft spot to his 9 rescued cats. And so this is the avenue through which the villain gets to him where he's vulnerable. And the villain is a beautiful middle-aged woman who charms and flatters him, and she's exploiting his love for his cats as a way to get to his money. And the germ of the idea actually came from an advertisement I saw in a senior publication. And it read, if something happens to you, who will take care of your beloved pet? And that got my devious mystery writer's mind thinking, what if a con artist sets up what appears to be a legitimate nonprofit sanctuary for pets? And in this case, the villain targets well-to-do people who love their pets but don't have a good relationship with their children. The seniors worry that their beloved Muffy or Rover is going to get dumped at the pound after they die. So this con artist sells them annuities for this pet sanctuary that she's supposedly building. And she's promising luxury accommodations, vet care, food, lots of love. And the only hitch is the sanctuary doesn't exist except in phony photographs that she shows to prospective investors. And at the point that Tawny comes into the story, the villain has milked Mo for over $1 million. And then Tawny starts poking around, and the villain realizes her gravy train is in danger, so she starts going after Tawny. That's where the fireworks get going.
Yes.
That's one thing that I love about my time with Debbie when we are able to do interviews, because we just have a good time and we laugh a lot, and that makes me happy. So we're going to take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, more with Debbie. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author Debbie Burke today, and before the break we were talking about how her new novel, Stalking Midas, came about from some real-life experience and from some seminars that she attended, and the inspiration was, of course, the issue of elder fraud. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Let's get back to the interview.
So obviously you came into this from doing some seminars, doing some work like that. What other research did you then do to flesh out the story?
Actually, I know, as I say, I know from personal experience a number of people who were, have been scammed. And so from each one of them, I have learned, a little aspect here or there about kind of the psychology of the elderly victim. And that's very interesting, because one of the big factors that seniors feel is they are afraid of losing control of their money. If they get scammed, they're worried their kids are going to come in and say, "Hey, you can't take care of yourself anymore. We're taking over your money." So it's a big issue of loss of control and autonomy for many seniors. And so that was the kind of the psychology of how scammers can use that against elderly people was very interesting to me, and very interesting to explore in a fictional way. Because generally the older generation, for instance, Mo is 75, so he's old enough to still have that sense of pride and independence that the greatest generation had. And and he does not want to be dependent on anyone. He wants to maintain his own, his own life, and the rest of the world be damned. And this is something that happened with my adopted mother in real life. She was 90 plus years old and still living in her own home and very independent, refused to move in with either my sister or me. And the way that she was scammed was we were concerned about her because, she was 90 something years old. And so we had a visiting caregiver come in and, set up her medications and take her shopping and things like that. Because neither my sister nor I lived in San Diego where my mother was. And so the caregiver had good references. However, we found out later that she had been taking care of my mother's sister and had been stealing from her, and then started stealing from my mother. But nobody knew about it until after my mother's sister died, and then my mother died. And we discovered the hard way that she had been using my mother's credit cards and running up automatic charges on her bank account and things like this. So it was a real eye-opener. And the other thing that was very shocking was the difficulty of prosecuting people. We had all kinds of proof, charges, unauthorized charges from Discover and Visa. We had text messages from the caregiver saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'll pay back all the money I owe you." We had all this evidence proving, and having the thief admit that she'd done it. However, once my mother died, the police dropped the investigation because they said she's not alive to testify. And that
oh my gosh.
That was a huge shock. And we, did more research among more victims. And for instance, my sister works for the LA County court system, and her own judge, his brother was victimized in a similar way. And again, once the victim dies, the prosecution drops because they aren't available to testify.
I had no idea. That is crazy.
We were just utterly shocked. We couldn't believe it. So I have been doing, writing articles about that to alert people because it is you don't find out about these things until you actually go through them yourself. And it's a real eye opener and a real shocker about how pervasive elder fraud is and how easily people can get away with it. If you don't get caught and prosecuted, hey, you just go on to your next victim. There's no deterrent.
Right. Wow. So, I mean, why stop if you can keep getting away with it?
Right. So that I had finished writing Stalking Midas at the time my mother was victimized, but I went back and rewrote parts of it to incorporate some of these lessons that I had learned from the real life experience. So that's it's something that's close to my heart. It's a subject that's close to my heart, that people are vulnerable and not as able to protect themselves as they were as younger people. And I just think it's a terrible crime for predators to prey on elderly people.
Right. And I know that you can't go back and fix what happened with your mother, but excuse me, did you feel was there any sort of catharsis with the writing of this? As you'd already finished it, but then you went back. Did it help at all?
Actually, not so much that, but I have been giving talks, public service talks to senior groups since that came out, since I published the book. And I feel good about doing that because it's something where I can warn other people who are in the risk pool, in the category of easy prey. And I think that has maybe done a little bit of good where people hear me telling them about some of the warning signs to watch out for and ways that they can protect themselves, and some of the shocking things like, hey, if even though you have evidence, if the victim dies, the prosecution is dropped. And so I think people appreciate that they can they're better off protecting themselves and preventing it from happening rather than trying to react to fraud after the fact when it's too late. So that's
right.
The message I've been trying to get out with both the articles I've been writing for senior publications and also for the talks that I've been giving to groups. So that kind of helps me feel like I'm doing something about the problem.
Right. In terms of writing, since this is the second in a series, did you find the writing, was it a different process in any way for you or kind of the same?
Well, because I've written a number of books, and this is actually, I think, the third series of books that I've written, it's the part that is most fun for me is you get to know the main characters better with each book. It's kind of like getting to know people in real life. Over time, you hear more stories from them. You learn more about their backgrounds and what their past experiences are. And that's something that the characters continue to develop with each new book. They get into a different situation that challenges them and brings up past experiences that they draw from in order to deal with the problem. When I started out writing Stalking Midas, I didn't know yet that Tawny had a grandfather with dementia who was swindled out of the family farm. And that somehow that backstory started bubbling up from my subconscious, and that as it developed, that provided a stronger motivation for why Tawny is so determined to help Mo and refuses to give up on him, even though he's got a terrible temper and he doesn't cooperate when she tries to help him. And he starts out as a work assignment for her, but becomes someone she truly cares about and wants to help, because that's kind of her. She couldn't help her grandfather, but this is a way of redemption where she can try and help Mo.
Okay, third break of the podcast. And when we come back, we'll be talking a little bit about the third book of the series, which is coming out in just a few weeks. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking, of course, with author Debbie Burke. We have been talking about her Tawny Lindholm's series, and we are now going to talk a little bit about the upcoming third novel in that series. Let's get back to the interview.
And speaking of writing series, the third book in the series comes out in January, which is very cool. So, what can you tell us about that book without, giving too much away from the future?
Well, thanks for asking. I appreciate that. And yes, I'm looking forward to getting that one released. This one is a little different. In the first two books were set in the Flathead Valley of Montana, and Eyes in the Sky, it takes place in Billings, Montana, on the Rim Rocks. Oh. And the Rim Rocks are a bunch of sheer sandstone cliffs that rise hundreds of feet above the city of Billings. And they are a world-famous destination for rock climbers. And, of course, being sheer cliffs, they're a perfect setting for a murder. So that was that's kind of fun in a different different location.
That
and now I do have to give
that I saw.
Right, yeah. Now I do have to give a spoiler alert here because in Stalking Midas, Tawny and her boss Tillman spend most of the book butting heads while trying to avoid their attraction to each other. And here's the spoiler. In the end, they wind up in a personal relationship together, even though they both know it's felony stupid for an employee to become involved with the boss. But
right.
They do.
Especially a cranky boss like Tillman.
Right. But they do care deeply for each other, but their relationship is not going to go smoothly. And so in the third book, that I start exploring some of that. Tillman brings Tawny to his home in Billings to get better acquainted with his three troubled teenagers. And while she's there, his oldest daughter attempts suicide, and Tawny saves the girl's life. And that causes no end of problems with his toxic ex-wife, who's jealous that Tawny gets along better with the kids than they do with their own mother. So there's plenty of intrigue going on there. And then on top of family problems, there's an enemy gunning for Tillman, trying to ruin his law practice and break him financially. So those are the problems that tangle up in Eyes in the Sky.
I think that Tawny should just stop leaving the house.
But then it wouldn't be any fun to write books about her staying home.
Right. The series would be very boring.
Right. You have to get your characters. You might like them, but you have to keep getting them in trouble in order to make a book that's worth reading. So,
yes.
So you just torture them no end.
Do you have a number in mind for the number of books in the series, or are you just going to keep writing as things come to you?
Well, actually, I'm wrapping up the fourth book right now, and it's a little change of pace because it is set in Florida and during Hurricane Irma. And that Tawny and Tillman are on vacation visiting Tillman's old high school baseball coach. And the coach was essentially a surrogate father to Tillman, so they're quite close. However, the coach has a serious gambling problem and vanishes during Hurricane Irma. And so they spend much of the book searching for him through floods and no electricity and snakes that are swimming around and, just all kinds of hardships that are a result of Hurricane Irma. And the mystery is, did he disappear on purpose to escape his gambling debts, or was he abducted and murdered? So that's kind of the crux of that story.
Okay. So the fourth book is in the works. You also write, well, I have to say that you keep moving further and further away from Kalispell, and this is making me sad, Debbie.
Well, actually, my husband was in Florida during Hurricane Irma and experienced the full wrath of it. The eye went right over the condominium building where he was, and so it was too too unique and interesting an experience not to take advantage of in a fictional way. So, and you know, I have a lot of friends who survived Irma, and it was a huge impact to all of Florida. And it's when something like that happens and you have no phones, you have no electricity, you have no refrigeration, no gasoline, no nothing, it really brings out the worst in people, but also in some ways the best in people. So it's an interesting situation to explore fictionally. So it's I'll wind up back in Montana for sure because I'm a Montana girl, but I had to take advantage of you know, the interesting things that happened during Irma.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you still writing for the Kill Zone?
I am. That's a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing that. It's about a dozen mystery, suspense, and crime authors, and we rotate right in. It's a daily blog that comes out with posts every day about the various aspects of writing. And although it's got a focus on crime fiction, there are a lot of interesting, helpful tips for any genre of writing. So it's been named by Writer's Digest as one of the 101 best websites for writers, and that has been awarded that, many years in a row. So it's a very fun, interesting, helpful site. I like to say I got my MFA for free from what I learned at the Kill Zone when I was a reader and not a contributor. And in addition to my regular Tuesday posts that I write every other Tuesday, I started a monthly feature called True Crime Thursday that spotlights unusual crimes, that past and present. And that's kind of fun to dig up some of these strange crimes that, you couldn't make this stuff up. For instance, for Thanksgiving, I wrote about actual cases of turkey theft, including there was a story about a couple of goofballs who stole live birds from a farm and stuffed them in the trunk of their car and tried to escape. And when the cops caught up to them, the guys were trying to get rid of the evidence by shooing the birds away and turning them loose, but there were still a couple of turkeys stuck in the truck, so they were convicted. But as a result of that crime, it became a felony in North Dakota to steal turkeys. So you can't make this stuff up.
No, you can't. And I'm just imagining opening that trunk with many, many really, really angry turkeys.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Oh wow, that sounds like a lot of fun, but also crazy. The writing sounds really fun, not the stealing of turkeys.
Right. It is fun. And, of course, some of the cases are unsolved mysteries that are very, very tragic cases. But then you run across something like this crazy turkey theft, and it just makes you smile. You can't help but get a good laugh out of it. So.
Exactly.
So you ever hear those laws, or you find out about a law in a certain place and you're like, there has to be a story behind that. Well, in this case, there is a story behind the turkeys and the law, and turkeys in a trunk just seems like a really bad idea. Turkeys in a Trunk, though, could be a bad movie. Sounds like a really bad band name. Could be all kinds of things. Let's go ahead and take our last break of the podcast. Then when we come back, we'll be talking about Debbie's work with the Flathead Writers Group. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Debbie Burke.
I know you're also involved with the authors of the Flathead group. Is there anything coming up with that group that you would like to highlight?
Oh, as a matter of fact, yeah, our annual writing conference is September 19th and 20th in 2020, and that takes place in Kalispell, Montana, and it's our 30th anniversary. So we're pulling out all the stops to celebrate. So if anyone is looking for a really fun, friendly, reasonably priced gathering, please check out the Flathead River Writers Conference. And it's going to be a good time. We always pack a lot of it's very information and education oriented, but also a lot of fun.
And I'll just say, if you want to go somewhere beautiful in September, Kalispell is not a bad place to go.
You can't beat it. You can visit Glacier Park, which, the colors are gorgeous, and it's just a fun vacation as well as an educational opportunity. And so we have a lot of our attendees who come back year after year, and they usually tack on a few days before or after the conference and go out and do some sightseeing and enjoying Montana in the fall.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So, what in all of your free time, because it sounds like you have so much of it, what have you been reading?
Actually, I have been reading several mysteries from some of the authors of the Kill Zone, who, my blog mates on the Kill Zone. One of them is Jordan Dane. Another one is P.J. Parrish. James Scott Bell, John Gilstrap, and so it's kind of fun to read the books where I've never met these people face to face, yet we know each other as contributors on the Kill Zone. So I've been reading a number of their books lately, and that's kind of fun. I also I'm judging for the Pikes Peak Writers Conference contest right now, so I'm reading some manuscript excerpts that are entries in the contest, and actually ran across one that is as good a book, at least the excerpt I've read is as good a book as anything I've read, published or unpublished, in years. And so I'm hoping that will be a winner that will wind up being published, and I'll get to read the entire thing. So.
Oh, wonderful. I was being kind of silly when we first started talking before we were recording, and I was saying, so how is reading different in Florida than it is in Montana, because you're currently in Florida, and you said you actually have more free time right now, so you have been able to read a little more.
Right, and it's reading for fun. A lot of what I read is I'm either editing it or beta reading for another author, or doing research, so this is my Florida reading time is my fun beach reads, if you will. I get to read stuff that I normally wouldn't have time to read, even though I'd like to read more of it.
Yeah, I totally get the having time to read. There's a difference between reading, reading stuff that you need to read that you still enjoy and is fun, but also the things that are on your personal to be read list sometimes go by the wayside. Yeah.
Right. My
Yep.
poor Kindle, the shelves on my poor Kindle are sagging under the weight of all the books that I haven't gotten to yet. and
Nice.
I just got a Amazon gift card for Christmas, so I'm going to be out buying more books to stuff onto my poor Kindle. If
Nice.
only there was time to read them.
Right. But it's much easier to take all those books with you to Florida than if you had to pack them all. So that's nice.
Exactly. I do like the Kindle for that, because you can put 500 books on there and not have them cluttering up the bookshelves, and I still like paper books, but for practical reasons, I really do like the Kindle a lot.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
But I'm finding, a lot of my readers are older generation, 50 and above, and I'm finding that a great many of them do prefer the print paperback book. And the other surprising thing I'm finding is I do some work with school kids, helping with their writing, and just recently talked to a group of 8th graders who were doing NaNoWriMo. And in case your listeners don't know, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month, and the purpose of it is people try and write a draft of a novel in 30 days during the month of November. And so I was talking with a group of 8th graders who were participating in NaNoWriMo, which I think is just a great teaching tool for reading and writing students. But so many of them are liking the physical book and would prefer to read a physical book rather than read on their devices. And so it's kind of interesting watching the cycles go as far as what was popular. Then, of course, the print books were going to be all obsolete. Everybody was going to be reading on an electronic device. And then, of course, now print books are starting to come back and being appreciated by younger generations. It's not just us old fogies who like the paper book. So
right, nice.
That's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah,
and it
like
makes me hopeful too. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. So I know that you have a website. So if you could tell people how to find your website and if you are on any social media.
Okay, sure. My website is DebbieBurkeWriter.com, and it's all one word, DebbieBurkeWriter.com. And that is where I put announcements of new books that are coming out, and people can read excerpts of the books that I've written on there, see if they're interested. My books are available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. I'm on Facebook as Debbie Burke Writer, and I'm on Twitter as under @Burke_writer. So that's I'm not terribly into Facebook and Twitter because I do spend a lot of time on blogging on the Kill Zone, but I do sometimes put links to my Kill Zone posts on Facebook and Twitter.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you were hoping to cover during our time together?
Not really. You ask very, very good questions, and it's so it's always fun to talk with you. People who are aspiring writers just say don't give up. I'm one of those people that it was only 30 years to overnight success. So, that's, it's the persistence and staying with it that gets you through, being a writer, in spite of all the disappointments, like publishers going out of business and magazines folding. You just keep writing because you love it, and you can't help yourself. So the only way, I have a dear friend and mentor, Dennis Foley, who says you can't fail at writing. You can only stop trying. And I think that's very, very good advice for not only writing, but life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Debbie, it's always fun to talk to you, and I really appreciate you taking the time, especially this week after Christmas. So thank you so much for joining me again on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Well, one quick question is, when in January does the third book come out?
I believe it's January 23rd is
okay.
the estimated date. So,
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you again to Debbie for joining me on the weekend after Christmas, the weekend before New Year's Eve. If it sounds like it ended sort of abruptly there, it did and it didn't. The rest of the recording was just us chatting about all sorts of different things, and you don't probably need to hear us chatting about all sorts of different things. I had a good time, and I hope Debbie had a good time, but probably not something that needs to be added to the podcast. So you just get the book stuff and some of the other silly stuff, but not the, let's talk about Montana stuff. You get enough of that from me, right? Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much to Debbie. Thank you as always to you, my listeners, for joining me. I am so happy to be a part of your lives and have you be a part of mine. As always, if you enjoy the show, please do us the solid of giving us a nice review, whether written or just a nice 5-star review. Either way, it really helps us out. Also, follow us on social media. Comment on the posts or on the podcasts. Is there any author that you love who you'd love to hear on the podcast, et cetera, et cetera? Just interact. Love to hear from you. Follow us, retweet, do all those wonderful social media type things that help a podcast out. In the meantime, I hope that you have a wonderful, safe, happy New Year's. Whether you're staying home on your couch, you're going out and doing something fun and fancy, be safe. And, I'd say get lost in a good book. That's more if you're staying home on the couch. If you're going out to something fancy, maybe try to stay in the moment. But if you need to sit in a corner with a book, I'm totally on board with that as well. Happy New Year's, and I'll talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.